Oh, this is Sherlyn Varela, Spanish interpreter in the English channel. Can you just say something just to make sure I can hear?
Hello, this is
Yes.
Ayana Brown.
Perfect. Thank you, Ayana. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Sherlyn.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say welcome to our Rincon Arroyo Watershed Flood Protection Project evening meeting, our public scoping meeting. We are giving it a few more minutes to allow more people to join. We had a few more respondees register for this event than we're seeing in the attendees list. So we're not sure if people are having technical difficulties or if there's just a delay with possibly getting home from work, but we want to give them another 5 minutes or so. So I just wanted to let you know, I believe the people who are on right now are on the phone, that we are definitely having this meeting. You're in the right place, and please just hang on. We're going to start in just a little bit. So thank you for your patience. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started now, and hopefully any other registrants will just join as we progress. The meeting is being recorded, and I thank you for joining us once again at the Rincon Arroyo Watershed Flood Protection Project Public Scoping Meeting. We're having this meeting tonight, and this is one of 3 offerings to hear this information that's going to be presented at the meeting tonight. It will again be played, the recording of this meeting will be played at a live public gathering there in Hatch. And there will also be a posting of this recording on the NRCS website and a link from the Dona County government website. So people will have various opportunities to view it. And if you're participating live tonight and miss any information or want to hear it again, or feel free to refer a friend who lives in the watershed or just nearby and would be interested in this project, that they have those additional opportunities as well. Okay, so first things first, we want to let you know that if you're having any technical difficulties, the best source for help is going to be WebEx help at the phone number shown on the screen, 866-229-3239. So please go ahead and utilize that service if you are not having good audio or not having good visual. Each presenter will be on screen, and then also we're going to be showing you our presentation. So there are some visuals to it. But if you miss anything, once again, in this live meeting, please just check back with the NRCS state website for New Mexico, and we are going to have a posting of it so you can view it later. Okay, we also want to let you know that we have 2 forms of interpretation available tonight. As you can see, we already have one of our interpreters on screen, and she is providing American Sign Language interpretation. So that will be happening throughout this event with the presentation, but also with the question and answer and comment portion. We also have online Spanish language interpreters, and they are available there to interpret from English to Spanish what we are saying throughout the presentation. And once again, that's going to be applicable to your questions, the answers, and any comments that need to be made as well. So we welcome everyone who's in the community. We hope that everyone is comfortable. And if you have any comments, questions, or anything like that, there is going to be time to ask those at the end of the meeting after the presentation, but there's going to be plenty of time, so don't feel nervous about that. All right. And so we just wanted to let you know further information regarding the American Sign Language interpreter. She is pinned to the screen, but you can adjust your view. If you would like to adjust the ASL interpreter screen to be larger or smaller, simply click the 2 lines in the center of the screen and drag them left or right to enlarge or minimize the screens. If you are joining through a mobile app, simply click the small circle icon at the top right of your screen to change the view to share the presentation and ASL interpreter on your screen, okay? The instructions are currently on the screen, and we will post them in the Q&A for your reference, okay? All right, so the purpose of our meeting tonight, we are here because we want you to know about our project in particular. We understand that there are several different studies going on in the Hatch community to help with different resource concerns that you have. And we are not even the only study that's going on to address the flooding issue. But our project is more so focused, as the name implies, on the Rincon Arroyo. So it is originating in the community of Rincon more so than the town of Hatch, just as a little bit of a differentiation between some other projects that are in the area that are valid and needed. And just to let you know, from a federal government agency standpoint, they are going to have different effects on different parts of the watershed. So we're not overlapping federal funds for the same purpose. This meeting tonight is really important to NRCS in our process of doing watershed planning. We want to hear from you. We want to know what the public thinks. We want to know what your concerns are, and we want to know any questions that you have. We want to know what you see the problems, where they are, what they are, the amount of water, of flooding that you're receiving. We're interested in hearing all of that from you. So please feel free to share it either tonight in the Q&A, at the live meeting on Thursday this week, or you can email me, and my contact information will be provided at the end of this presentation if you think of some things later. So we are having the scoping period open for approximately 30 days overall, and we're already in the midst of it, but just we hope that this presentation will jog your mind a little bit to think in more detail about the flooding that happens from the Rincon Arroyo, and for you to share your information, because you are our local resources. I mean, you live there, you work there, you drive through there on a regular basis, you know what's going on, and so we definitely want to hear from you. Okay, now I would like to introduce the project team. Next slide, please. All right, so I am, as I've said a couple of times now, Ayana Brown. I work for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and I am the Assistant State Conservation Engineer, shown on the screen. For the local sponsoring agency, the ones who came to NRCS and requested assistance for this community-wide project, we have Dona County, represented by John Gwynn, with the director of the Dona County Flood Commission. We also have Michael Garza, who is the engineering supervisor with the Dona County Flood Commission. Next slide, please. Okay. Additionally, on our team, we have the consultant group, which is a combination of DJ&A and HDR engineering, represented by Gibson Hartwell with DJ&A. He's the project manager for the consultant team. We have Dessa Dale, also with DJ&A, and she is the NEPA specialist, National Environmental Policy Act specialist, with DJ&A for this project. We have Dan Pfeiffer with HDR Engineering, and he is the hydrology and hydraulics lead for this project. And Christy Shepard, also with HDR, and she is the communications lead for our project. And so that represents our core team for the project. And of course, we are calling on resources from other specialists and other federal agencies, but also within our own agencies or organizations that are represented by these team members: HDR, Engineering, DJ&A, Dona County Government, and NRCS, to pull together all of our resources to make sure we have the best information possible to apply in this situation. All right, and in reflection of that, I just want to let you know that it's definitely an interdisciplinary team. We're not only engineers, we're environmental scientists, we're biologists, we're surveyors, we're planners, we're foresters, we're all of the resource specialists that can address the resource concerns in this watershed that focus on flood protection, flood prevention, and just helping to have a healthier watershed overall. So at this time, I would like to turn the meeting over to Christy to give you some meeting instructions.
Thank you, Ayana. Participants joining us via their computers on WebEx or through their phones are currently muted. I'll describe the meeting format and how to participate in just a moment. But first, if you're having any technical issues right now, you may need to hang up or log off and then redial or reconnect. If that does not work, please contact WebEx Help at 866-229-3239. Again, that number is 866-229-3239. We're looking forward to your comments and questions. After the presentation, we'll describe and display instructions for asking a question or making a comment. Keep in mind that after this meeting, you can continue to ask questions or provide comments anytime through May 25th by visiting the study website, and we'll provide that link later and also provide that in the chat box for our attendees. The format for tonight is a short presentation, and then the remainder of the meeting will be open for comments and questions. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be posted to the study webpage following the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Christy. All right, so we just wanted to let you know a little bit of the background of how this program came to be and be able to provide assistance in rural and agricultural communities. So NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the federal agency that I work for, has been granted a couple of authorities by Congress to enact watershed protection programs. And we call our program the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program. So the authorities are listed on the screen for you to see, but the Flood Control Act of 1944 kind of kicked everything off. And then we had the pilot watershed program that was authorized by the Department of Agriculture's Appropriations Act of 1954. And then we had the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Act of 1954 as well. And that was enacted through Public Law 83-566. So a lot of times this program is referred to as the PL 566 program. And that's where that history comes from a little bit. We also had a fourth authority that was enacted in 1981 through the Resource Conservation and Development Program, authorized under the Agricultural and Food Act of that year, that expanded the authorities of the program to be able to address a few more resource concerns in different situations. Now, although the Resource and Conservation Development Program is no longer authorized, any structures that we assisted as NRCS, the public, to put in rural communities, agricultural landscapes, also in urban communities, if they require rehabilitation, those projects, as well as the ones that were authorized under the other acts, are eligible for our watershed rehabilitation program. So that's an important distinction to make with NRCS, is that we have helped build flood control structures, not just dams, but also channels, flood prevention channels, levees, and irrigation channels as well, all across the country. And we really do want to be here to support our sponsors long term. And so if we initially assisted in constructing any of those features, any of those projects under one of these four authorities, then our watershed rehabilitation program, which is another program under the overarching Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program, is available to you as well. If we assisted you as an individual landowner in constructing irrigation pond or some other natural resource protection feature simply for, or solely for, I should say, you as the landowner, if it was for a single purpose for a single landowner, that was typically done either through our Conservation Technical Assistance Program or one of our land treatment programs that preceded our Environmental Quality Incentives Program that we have now. And so those projects are not eligible for this Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program. But if you have any questions about the difference and you don't know what your features are for what's on your land, please just get in touch with me. And if I can't assist you, I will direct you to our local NRCS field office staff who will be able to help you. Okay. So a little bit of background there, and we can move on to the next slide. All right, so just to give you a broad picture, with the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program, our purpose is to assist sponsors to improve conditions for communities in their jurisdiction. We always need a local sponsoring organization to step up and say that they want assistance for their constituents in their jurisdiction, the way that Dona Ana County government has done with this project. Our focus for the program, as we're part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is agricultural and rural communities. We're trying to support them. We want to make sure that they receive all the resources that they need. And so that is part of our mission and part of our focus. We have done, and you will see, hopefully you have observed some of our projects in more urban areas as well. So that can sometimes happen if there is still a rural or agricultural benefit to the project. And what more often has happened is that the community, the town or the city has grown up around what used to be a larger agricultural area. But as I mentioned earlier, we continue to provide support if we initially provided support under one of the four authorities that enable us to have the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program. So some of the authorities that are listed in those laws that we saw on the previous slide include flood protection, but they also have that agricultural water management, as I mentioned before, the irrigation channels that we've helped to construct in various locations and various projects, watershed protection, which typically includes some flood protection as well, some wildlife habitat, and there are more authorities that we have as NRCS. And all of these authorities are enacted under the program with different cost share rates. So there's more and more detail there to share. So if you think that your community might be interested in this program, once again, my contact information will be shown at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me and we can have an initial discussion. With regards to flood protection for that particular authority, NRCS is allowed to cover up to 100% of the allowable costs for planning, design, and construction. And so our focus is definitely on the technical side of providing assistance. We're a technical service agency, so that is what we look at. And most of the allowable costs in any one of those three phases is going to be the technical services. We are going to talk about some of the sponsor responsibilities as we move through the slides, just to give you a heads up. The project selection, as I briefly mentioned earlier, has to include more than one benefit to more than one landowner. We need a local government entity to be the sponsor, and we have to see that there is genuinely an issue that needs correction in the community that is not already under the jurisdiction of another federal agency. So those are just some of the criteria. Once again, there are more that we can discuss, but we're keeping it brief tonight, okay? So next slide, please. All right, so here we want to talk about the role of NRCS and the role of the local sponsor in this project. As I mentioned earlier, a sponsor does have responsibilities and there'll be a financial cost to enacting those responsibilities or meeting them. Sponsors are responsible for acquiring all the permits for the project. Once again, NRCS provides the technical assistance to apply for the permits, but the actual cost of the permit application and submission, that is the sponsor responsibility. The sponsors are also responsible for utilities coordination. And if there is any financial compensation that has to be worked out with the utilities, the sponsors are responsible for handling that as well. They are responsible for the land rights acquisition. We can't install works of improvement or any flood protection measures on any land that we don't have the right to be on. You know, NRCS as a conservation agency, typically we deal with individual landowners. Even though we've had this program since the 1950s, NRCS as an agency, or in some variation, has been around since the 1930s. So we really started working with private individual landowners, and we always keep that in the forefront of our minds that we need permission. And so we transfer that responsibility to the sponsor, and they are able to enact it because this is their jurisdiction and they have the authority to do that. So land rights acquisition is not a small part of the project, and we appreciate all the hard work that the sponsors have to do to make that a reality so that we can install the works of improvement. And we just like the public to be aware of that so that you can understand how you're in it together. You're in it definitely with your local sponsoring organization because they need your help, specifically when they're going to need to acquire land, to know that you still support the project to that level, because giving up land or giving up any of your rights to land is always a big deal. So NRCS's role in the project, we serve as the primary overarching project administrator. We'll be here with you through all three phases of the project, definitely. We do provide the technical assistance, and it's multidisciplinary, as I mentioned earlier, to address the cultural resources, the environmental resources, and the biological resources concerns, and perform evaluations to see how our alternatives, the systems that we put together to say this is what we can do to positively affect flooding in the community and remove it to a certain degree, and different systems that we do in that regard. And we look at them from all these different angles, as well as from the social aspect and environmental justice aspect, to make sure that it really is going to be a benefit to the community. You know, we don't want to come up with a great idea that's not feasible to actually install, and we don't want to come up with an idea that it's going to cost more than it's actually saving the community. We're here to do this initial planning or studying of the situation and come up with alternatives to eventually go all the way to construction. So the goal of this project with NRCS is not just to study, but it is to get to construction. It's just that we're in the planning phase right now, and that's where we do the study. And so that's what we're doing, and we're involving you from the very beginning so that you're aware of what's going on and you can provide feedback throughout the process. But providing feedback earlier is always preferred, so it's easier for us to incorporate any issues or concerns that you raise, but also to make sure that our project is going to address the questions that you have and the real heart of the issues with regards to flooding. So we are providing the majority of the project funding. We're going to conduct the reviews of the project documents as we go through the process. We'll have a draft watershed plan - environmental assessment that will be put out to the public for review. And a little bit later, Gibson is going to tell you more details about that. And we're coordinating with the public in conjunction with the LSO, with the local sponsoring organization, to make sure that you stay informed of our process. And we're also coordinating and consulting with other government agencies, federal, state, and local, to make sure that we follow all of the laws and the rules, but also tap them as resources for information about the project area. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here we are in the scoping part of the project, and we're looking for your participation, definitely. We are reaching out to you as members of the public, whether you live in the community, have an interest in the community, work in the community. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you have observed about flooding. We want to know what headaches the flooding has caused you, any detrimental effects to your property, whether you're owning or renting. You know, if you live there, we want to know about how it affects you and your lifestyle. But also we want to hear from you if you've observed anything else, just, you know, in the community that's not directly connected to your property, but you observe it as a community member and think that it's a nuisance or a problem. Please let us know. Please let us know about that. We want to address your questions. We want to let you know, what direction the project is going in. We are here to address the flooding issue, and I think that NRCS is known in a lot of places, including New Mexico for sure, for our dam building ability. And definitely we have built a lot of dams, but dams are not the goal of the program, but they are one option for addressing flood protection. But they're not going to be the only option that is considered in this process. Definitely, we know that there are some other things that can be done on the landscape that can be equally effective. And effectiveness is what we're going for. We're going for flood protection. We're going for enhanced watershed quality. So these are the things that we're going to focus on, and we're going to look at all the tools that we have in our toolbox. It has grown considerably since the 1950s. So we're going to be considering a lot of different features. And once again, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about that a little bit later. Excuse me, losing my earbud. Okay. So I also want you to know that public input will be part of the official record of the project. As I mentioned before, there'll be a draft watershed plan - environmental assessment put out. And in there, you will be able to see the comments that were made and get an idea of where we have addressed them. We're going to host and offer another public meeting like this once that draft plan is made, and you'll have an opportunity to see how the comments were incorporated or addressed. So just briefly to give you an overview of the project and the timeline, as I mentioned before, we have 3 phases in NRCS's Watershed Operations Program, and they are planning, design, and construction or installation. So we're in the planning phase, that's the first one, and that typically takes anywhere from 18 months to 2 years. So that is the goal that we are shooting for with this project, and we're already about 6 months in. So we've been already gathering data and tapping resources from other federal, state, and local government agencies, and also members of the community that have information to share about this watershed. And we're going to continue to do that as we go through the process of assessing it and developing alternatives to meet the needs for flood protection. So that's about those 2 years. And then we look for the design process to take anywhere from a year to 18 months. And then we look for the installation. It really depends on what we're installing in terms of how long it takes. A lot of times when we're installing several different systems throughout a watershed, especially one as large as this, it will take a couple of years to complete installation. So that can vary greatly, but we hope to finish that part of the process in anywhere from 1 to 2 years. And that is provided that we continue to get funding support through Congress, of course. We're a federal government agency. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I think everyone who is participating tonight is well familiar with the watershed, but here's a graphic on the screen just to let you know, in case you are from out of the area, where we are in the state of New Mexico. We are down in the south area, just a little bit east of Hatch, New Mexico, the home of chili, known worldwide. Very proud of that. And so in this watershed, we are crossing county boundaries, going from Dona Ana County to Sierra, or Sierra to Dona Ana County, depending upon your point of view. But definitely the Village of Rincon is very important to the Rincon Arroyo Watershed Flood Protection Project, because a lot of the effect of what's going on in the upper watershed is really seen in that lower part of the watershed. And if we can improve the health and stability of the upper part of the watershed, the lower part of the watershed is going to benefit greatly. And so we're looking to see improvements in this project, or to enact improvements in this project throughout the watershed area. But we are not looking to build a lake. That's not a goal of this project. That is an authority that NRCS has, municipal and industrial water supply. We can help communities with that, but that is not a request that Dona Ana County has made for this project. So I don't want you to look at this graphic on the screen and think that we're trying to build you a lake that stretches from Dona Ana County into Sierra County, where that's not the goal. Flood protection over all of this area is the goal, but that doesn't mean necessarily a lake. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so as you are aware, a BLM is a large landowner in this watershed, and that map really shows accurately. They are the yellow color, I would say, on the map. And then you can see the state also has a significant portion in this watershed. And then we do have some private landowners in this watershed as well. So definitely we're going to be in contact with them throughout the project and wanting to hear what their concerns are to make sure that they are included or at least addressed in our watershed plan. Sometimes we can't fix every problem, but if we can fix the majority of them, we're still going to be moving forward with that. So just wanted you to know that we are aware of who the landowners are in this watershed and taking their concerns into consideration. And we suspect that BLM will be coming on as a cooperating federal agency, and so they will have an even bigger voice in the process as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is a diverse watershed with a diversity of land cover available. And that's something that we're definitely considering in the planning process, and definitely something that we are going to look to see what enhancements can be made in terms of what the land will naturally support. But as you know, there's forestry in this watershed. There's pasture or hayland in this watershed. We do have some crop cultivation here in the watershed. And we really typically have agricultural and rural communities. So there's not a lot of land development in this watershed, which sometimes can work in your favor. So we're looking to optimize that as much as possible as well. And it's good. We're excited. Next slide, please. All righty. So the land use in this watershed, as we have talked about the land cover, we know some of the goals for the watershed are to continue to be able to do agricultural activities, such as to have cropland, to have hayland, to be able to put animals out to pasture and have grazing lands. And also in recognition of this being largely land that is owned by the federal and the state government, we know that recreation is another feature that's important on this landscape. And something that we want to keep in mind is the progressive drought that we have been dealing with in the state at large, but also this area in particular over the last 20 years, and how that has degraded some elements of the landscape and not enabled it to support some functions that it used to. So we're going to see what we can do in the process of this project in making flood protection improvements to help the landscape heal. What we can do to help it support the natural functions that it does have in a healthier environment. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so at this point, I want to turn it over to John Gwynn to talk to you about the needs for this project and a little bit of how it came to be. John?
Hello, everyone. I'm John Gwynn from the Dona County Flood Commission. We're the local sponsor for this project. One of the things that we wanted to discuss and kind of give you a background of what this project is, how we got to this point. Sorry, I'm adjusting my camera here. Is that we basically what we see in this watershed is with the amount of water that comes through, and this is because of drought, because of vegetative loss from the drought, we're seeing large amounts of water that come into the arroyo and down and impacts the village of Rincon. It impacts farmlands, it impacts county and state roads. It also impacts the Rio Grande River itself. Basically, during this process of bringing water down, it causes sediment to deposit all throughout the bottom part of the watershed that's carried from the top of the watershed. And that creates a lot of expense in moving the sediment out of the way. The village of Rincon itself is in a flood zone mainly because of this arroyo, and there is public infrastructure that's at risk, including roads and also a wastewater treatment plant. Obviously, all these different impacts cause some pretty significant losses, economic losses to the community, as well as the residents as a whole. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Gibson Hartwell to continue.
Thanks, John. So I'm Gibson Hartwell. I work for DJ&A, one of the consultants along with HDR that has been hired by the NRCS to assist with the watershed plan and environmental assessment.
Gibson, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we pause for just a moment for the Spanish interpretation to catch up?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're good to go.
Okay, great. So an environmental assessment is the document that has been chosen by the NRCS to comply with NEPA, because it is a federally funded project that invokes the National Environmental Policy Act. And NEPA, under NEPA, NEPA is created, you have to disclose environmental impacts and describe their significance under NEPA. And there are three different tools that we use to do that. There is a categorical exclusion, which is chosen when we don't expect any significant impacts. And on the other end of that, we have an environmental impact statement, which is a much more robust, kind of a lengthier process when you expect significant impacts on a project. So if we were expecting to have, for example, impacts on a federally listed threatened or endangered species, that might be one of the things, the types of things that would trigger an EIS. Not expecting any significant impacts on the project right now. So the environmental assessment fits right in between those two documents, and it's a real typical type of document, NEPA document for these types of projects, for watershed plans. And the purpose of this project, the purpose and need, which will be stated in the environmental assessment, is it's simply stated here. It's to reduce flood hazard to several things, to residents, homes, and businesses, to agricultural land and infrastructure. Here on this slide, we see a picture of rangelands in the upper part of the watershed. We also looking, of course, at impacts to row crops and cultivated farmlands down in the lower watershed on the floodplain. And also looking at reducing flood hazard to other infrastructure, the sewage treatment plant, roads, bridges, utilities, culverts. Next slide, please. So as part of the environmental assessment and our NEPA compliance, we will be looking at several different alternatives. And those alternatives will be created based on input that we get from today and input that we've been getting through our scoping, in talking with, working with the county, working with the NRCS and other stakeholder agencies, and you as well. And we'll be analyzing, comparing those alternatives. And one of the things that we have to consider for this project is economic considerations. So this is a National Economic Development Program. So Ayana referred to this earlier. We'll be looking at for each alternative, we'll be looking at the benefits versus costs. So this is a really important part for your role here, is to understand how are the floods impacting you. That's an important thing, to get a grasp on that. What damages to houses, vehicles, is it preventing you from working because you're dealing with flooding? Is it impacting your jobs, getting kids to school, crops if you working on farmlands? How is that impacting that? So those are the types of inputs that I think will be really important here. And one of the things we'll be working on in the environmental assessment to ensure that that impacts are held to below a significant level of mitigation measures. So we'll be minimizing any potential impacts to the environment, to human environment, to the physical, biological environment through mitigation measures. Next slide, please. So Ayana already mentioned this is it's a multi-year project, 18 months to 2 years. She mentioned it involves several resource professionals, engineers, sediment modelers, hydraulics, hydrology modelers, scientists, environmental scientists, biologists, wildlife biologists, plant specialists, archaeologists, just a whole list of resource specialists. And so it's a pretty complex project, but it can be boiled down into these 3 simple phases shown here on this screen. Phase 1 is the collection and analysis of data. That's the phase we're in right now, working with the Dona County to determine objectives for the project, identifying problems. Part of that, as I described, we're doing that with your help right now. And we're also inventorying resources, working with other agencies there, and we're analyzing that data. And we're going to take all of that information from this phase and then move that into phase 2, decision support. So there in phase 2, we'll be formulating alternatives and evaluating them to describe impacts to resources and comparing alternatives. And lastly, we'll be taking all of that and making decisions with this document. The NRCS will be making the decision on the alternative to select for this project. And that will move us into phase 3, which will be the implementation of the plan and evaluation of the plan. Next slide, please. Right now, I'm going to turn this over to Dan Pfeiffer, who is with HDR, and he's going to talk about data collection and analysis and some of the modeling efforts they are working on in the watershed.
Thanks, Gibson. Good afternoon. I'm Dan Pfeiffer, the engineering analysis and design lead for this project. As we saw in the graphic on the previous slide, steps 1 through 4 in phase 1 include identifying problems and opportunities, determining the project objectives, creating an inventory of existing resources, and analyzing the resource data provided by Dona County and others. As an integral component of phase 1 for this project is the engineering analysis that will produce 2 key project tools. These include a comprehensive hydrologic and hydraulic model, as well as a sediment transport and sediment yield analysis of the watershed. The hydrologic and hydraulic model will take watershed elevations, soil types, land cover, and published rainfall into consideration to develop an existing conditions, flood depth, and velocities map. This model will become a tool to be used in future project phases to evaluate alternatives. The purpose of the sediment yield and sediment transport analysis will be to develop a better understanding of both the volume of sediment that is produced in the watershed, as well as the ability for the watershed arroyos to move or transport that sediment. Both data points will be important in the evaluation of project mitigation alternatives. I'm going to hand it back over to Gibson to discuss the project phase 2.
Okay, so the project phase 2, decision support, we're going to be right now obviously doing scoping, reaching out to public and the stakeholders. There'll be another opportunity for that in phase 2 when we write the EA and circulate the draft to the public and get a comment back on that. That's really important, and it's really important. I thank everybody for attending here today. It's just a key part of NEPA and projects like this planning, and I'm real happy to see the attendees that are here. So we will be formulating and reviewing a range of alternatives for flood mitigation and looking at the reduction of sediment transport and the promotion of revegetation. We know these are themes that a number of people have thrown out as solutions in this watershed, and so we'll be examining these things in detail. And the goal for us is to identify the preferred alternative in the environmental assessment. Next slide, please. And Ayana, if you could take it from here, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, Gibson. Happy to. Thank you. Okay, so we wanted to talk to you about some of the potential mitigation measures that we're considering in this watershed. We're going to show you a few slides with some examples, but this is by no means everything that we are considering. But we did want to stress in this presentation that NRCS does more than build dams, and we realize that there has been movement in the community's concern about the incorporation of green infrastructure. And specifically in this watershed, there are opportunities for infiltration that we don't want to miss out on, because once again, we recognize the multiple year drought that we've been in this watershed, and we want to react to that and make sure that we are more resilient to drought and extreme weather conditions as we move forward, so that the effects of flooding in the watershed can be mitigated effectively over the lifespan of this project. And that's just one thing that we hadn't mentioned just yet in the program, is that when we're looking at mitigation measures, the things that you're going to see on the screen, what you see in these 2 slides, are going to be time-proven measures that NRCS has confidence will last for the lifespan of the project with proper operation and maintenance. This is not a pilot program now. This is not a testing program. We install what we believe will work, what we have data and history on to prove that it will work for you, because this is a long-term commitment that the local sponsoring agency is making with NRCS and to you as members of the community. Our program requires a 50 to 100 year agreement between the local sponsoring organization and NRCS. So that's the lifespan that we expect these features to last for. With proper operation and maintenance once again, but somewhere in between that time. And so we are looking for proven works of improvement that actually work, that we have seen that happen all over the country. So when we talk about infrastructure modifications, we are aware of the railroad in the watershed, and we are aware, various culverts and their locations in the watershed too. So we'll be looking at those to see if they need some changes, whether they can be elevation modifications or they can be enlargements. Rarely do we see a need to downsize anything, but that's possible too. We're not going to throw that out. So we're indefinitely infiltration, as we see our aquifers being depleted, we're going to look at ways to slow the water down and let it infiltrate into the land, because that's going to do several things for us. That is, one, going to allow it to stay where it falls and therefore benefit the soil where it falls, but also benefit the wildlife community, whether you're looking at plants or animals. Everything uses their environment as a resource. So if we can keep the water where it falls, then also we're going to provide a resource to the local wildlife. And a big benefit of it, as Dan touched upon a little bit, is the sediment transport. We'll slow down that sediment transport and allow the soil to function and be healthy where it is existing on the landscape, instead of so much of it moving downstream and piling up on farmers' fields where it's not needed and it's not making an improvement, or getting into, the arroyo itself and eventually into the Rio Grande River. So we want to slow that down dramatically. We want to make operation and maintenance downstream a little bit easier on everybody and just a little bit more reasonable for agricultural production. Definitely, we're going to keep those things in mind. Okay, next slide, please. Here are some other features, as we talked about culvert enlargement. Sometimes it can be culvert enlargement, or it can be bridge replacement or bridge installation. Widening of the channel of the arroyo in some areas. It might need to be narrowed in some areas, but whatever we can do to slow down the water and therefore slow down the sediment as it's moving through the system, those are all features that we're going to consider to help do what's shown in that top slide, which is revegetate and reduce the erosion and sediment transport throughout this watershed. Because if we can keep the soil where it's originating, the entire watershed is going to be healthier. It's going to be able to be more productive and support those land use functions that we talked about earlier, in terms of supporting cropland, supporting grazing and pasture, being able to support recreation, honestly, effectively, because we know that recreation has a strong effect on the landscape. When you start to have those ATV tracks, that's not nothing. That's starting a potential path for erosion. So we need to do things in the watershed to make it resilient, to be able to support those functions in a limited capacity, not to be overrun, but just so that the watershed can do everything that the public and the community need it to do safely. Okay, next slide, please. So as we go through this scoping phase, we do want you to know what our next steps are, so that you know about your opportunities to comment and ask questions and just generally provide feedback. As Gibson said, we're thrilled with all of you who are able to come out, so to speak, virtually tonight, and we look forward to seeing people in person, and we hope that several people will download the presentation or watch it online as well, so that you can talk to us about what your concerns are, what the impacts of flooding are for you, what the issues have been in the past, and what issues you might see for the future. How is flooding limiting your use of the land? What would you be doing differently if your property wasn't being flooded? We're interested in hearing about all of that. We're definitely, as I said, as a part of USDA, we have a focus on agriculture and agricultural production in the rural landscape, and that's everything that this community is. So we're interested in the businesses that support agriculture that are here, and we're interested in the infrastructure that supports the community that's here. what's working and what's not. And we do want to know, how it affects your income. Is it a detrimental effect? When is that most likely to happen? Once again, we know that we're in the heart of chili country, and we definitely want to make sure we can keep that production growing. So we are here to support you and keep it alive and well, not only for New Mexico, but for the entire country. And the comment period is 30 days. As Christy mentioned earlier, we're already in the midst of it. It started April 25th and is going to go all the way until May 25th. But as I said earlier as well, once we have the draft watershed plan - environmental assessment together, we're going to come back to you with another public meeting. We're going to present that document to you and let you know what alternatives we've studied in detail and what the pros and cons of those are, and then the preferred alternative that we've chosen to move forward with into design, and make sure that that is something that you can support as something being installed on the landscape in your community, and to understand how it's going to function and what level of flood protection it's going to provide. We always have to be realistic when we're doing projects. As Gibson mentioned, there's going to be an economic analysis done with this project, just as much as there's going to be environmental analysis and social analysis done for the consideration of the alternatives. But we want to make sure that it's worth your while to have this installed. And so we're going to be looking at all of those things and then coming back to you to explain what we found in the study process, and then what the decisions were made between Dona County and NRCS about what we can support moving forward into design and construction. All right, next slide, please. Okay. And I believe that at this point, I would like to turn the presentation back over to Christy, and she's going to talk to you about the public participation.
Thank you, Ayana. So for a piece of our public participations, you can submit your questions and comments in the following way. So you can comment live at our virtual public scoping meeting, which is tonight, or at our virtual screening, which is on Thursday, May 12th. So we are having a live virtual screening at the Hatch Community Center on May 12th. So you can provide comments at that location as well. You can also email Ayana at ayana.brown, so AYANA.BROWN at usda.gov. Again, that's Ayana Brown, ayana.brown at usda.gov. You can also call and provide your comments directly at 505-761-4452. You can check out the study webpage. There will be a link in the chat in just a moment, so you can check that out. You can provide comments directly on there through our comment forms. We have an electronic comment form on there, or a hard copy comment form that you can print out and then mail back in. If you would like to submit your comments through mail, you just need to send them to attention Ayana Brown, and the address is 100 Sun Avenue Northeast, Suite 602, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the zip code is 87109. At this point, we will now begin the question and answer portion of the meeting. To verbally make a statement or ask a question, we ask that you please virtually raise your hand. Here's how you can do that. For those using WebEx through your internet browser, mobile phone app, or your WebEx desktop app, simply follow the instructions on your screen. If you would like to ask your question or make a statement, you can click the raised hand icon. When you are called, the moderator will unmute your mic and allow you to speak. When you are finished, the moderator, that's me, will mute your line, and we ask that you lower your hand by clicking on the raised hand icon again. Again, for those joining us online, all of these WebEx instructions are showing on your screen. If you are joining by phone as a call-in participant, please press *3 if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. This gives us a hand raise signal, and when it's your turn to speak, we'll call on you and your line will be unmuted. When you finish speaking, you can press *3 again to remove the hand raise signal. If you are joining through our virtual screening on May 12th. Again, you can follow these instructions on the screen. If you have joined us using one of the WebEx applications, you may also choose to submit your questions or comments in writing by using the WebEx Q&A feature. These instructions are displayed on your screen. Remember, if you are joining by phone, you can press *3 if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Again, this gives us a hand raised signal, and when it's your turn to speak, we'll call on you and your line will be unmuted. When you finish speaking, please press *3 again to remove the hand raised signal. And a reminder, if you are having any technical issues, please contact WebEx Help at 866-229-3239. We will do our best to respond to questions and comments in the order that they're received. Please be patient as we may have many questions. If needed, we can extend our meeting time to accommodate additional responses to questions. If we still have outstanding questions at that time, we will respond to written questions as a part of the meeting summary and provide it to participants by posting it on our study webpage. For those on the phone, you may submit your questions or comments by phone or other methods following the meeting. And with that, we will begin the question and answer portion. So for our attendees, if you do have a question, feel free to click that raised hand icon or use that Q&A box to submit your question. We'll give folks just a couple of minutes in case they're typing out any questions. All right, we'll give folks just a couple more minutes in case a question comes up. In the meantime, in case there are any questions, we will just transfer over to our NRCS non-discrimination statement for your record and your reference. Again, those joining us on the phone, you can either press *3 to raise your hand, or if you're joining through the WebEx applications, you can raise your hand or use that Q&A box if you have a question. All right, Ayana, I'm not seeing any questions at this time. Do you want to go ahead and move forward with the next slide?
Okay, thank you, Christy. Yes, we want to once again say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. And once again, invite you to email or call me if you have questions or comments that you think of later. And we will certainly make sure that they are addressed in the plan. And we hope that you will check out the NRCS website. It was posted in the chat. If you would like to listen to any part of this video, of this presentation again, it has been recorded and will be available for your use. And feel free to share that link with other people that you think would be interested in the project. And we just look forward to a successful implementation of this flood protection project. And we're very excited to be working with Dona County. We're excited to be in Rincon, and we're excited to stretch all the way into Sierra County. So hopefully we can make some really good things happen here. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us. Take care and everyone stay safe.